Hello and welcome to another excelattheoffice.com video. This is video 2 in how to make my Dunder Mifflin people dashboard, or how you can make an Excel dashboard for yourself using any kind of data really, but I'm going to show you how to make a dashboard like this with interactive filters in Excel. You can apply this to a sales data, product data, but I'm using HR data. In video 1 I demoed the dashboard, so I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to get straight into the steps that I'm going to do in this video. So the steps I'm going to do here are steps 1 and 2, where I'm going to create all these sheets. So we're going to start from scratch from a new Excel workbook. I'm going to do my color swatches, readying my workspace for them, what I'm going to create. And the first thing I'm going to create is get my data imported, clean it up and get it ready. So there's often a debate at the moment with, should we use Power BI and go through that learning curve and spend tens of thousands of pounds on Power BI, Click or some similar software? Whereas actually, if you just learn Excel a bit more, there's so much you can do, and dashboards is one of those things. So I'm going to go through this with you, but the first thing I'm going to do, I've got my brand new workbook open. There's little in it at the moment. First thing I'm going to do is bring across my steps to that workbook. I'm going to right click on the steps, move or copy. And rather than just move, I'm going to tick the create a copy box, and rather than in this book, I'm going to choose the drop down into my book 1 and click OK. So now my steps are here. This is a funny thing. Bear in mind, in new Office Excel, Word and PowerPoint, I've got a little video showing you, but let's do it now because it's annoying. The color scheme has all changed. So when I go to home, I choose my colors. Microsoft has changed all the color schemes, so it's kind of earthy and oceany, much of a muchness. So I want to change that theme. So to do that, I go onto Page Layout, Colors. So this is the new scheme they've put in place. I like the old scheme, so I'm going to revert it to that. Alright, so the steps I want to do in this video is set out my core worksheets and colours. Well, I've started doing the colours already by sorting out my colour scheme to the old one. So what I'm going to do first of all is, instead of my sheet 1, I'm going to have a nicer multi-page workbook with a logical flow. And what I mean by a logical flow is left to right. You start with your introduction page on the left, then the broad top level information, so the dashboard itself. Then as you start to drill down in more detail through the pivots to the raw data, ultimate level of detail, then that's further to the right. So that's how I do it, and I use some color scheme to kind of show the logical order of things too. So my most important things are colored in this dark teal, my medium important things are colored in the medium teal, and then the less important things are grayed out. The steps and update instructions are more for you watching this. So I'll go back to my book 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here on add a new sheet. I'm going to double click that sheet, left click and move it, and I'm going to call this one data. So that's where I'm going to store my data. I'm going to add another new sheet. Let's call that one intro. So it's going to be my introduction. This one will be my dashboard sheet. So add a sheet, pivots. That's going to come after my dashboard, but before my data. I'm going to actually move my lookups towards the end because that's less important than data, because it's actually supplementary to the data. As I'll show you, we're actually going to use a formula to look up a field and get it from the lookups. And so is my colors. Let's keep that at the end. So there we go. So I've renamed those, in case you didn't follow, sorry, just by double clicking in the tab that's been created. So there's my tabs. To change, I can delete items, so I no longer need this sheet. Rather than hide it, I'm going to properly delete it so it doesn't exist. I'm going to create my colors schemes. So I'm going to use a bespoke color scheme, as I've done here, where I've formatted my color scheme of the report. So my main color for titles, charts, bars, and icons, so all the main colors here for consistency. I've got this bespoke Dunder Mifflin kind of similar color to the Dunder Mifflin logo, so you might have a bespoke color in your logo that's not one of the ready-made colors in Excel, and therefore that's where a color scheme comes in handy. If I go back to here, and I'm going to insert the color, so I'm going to merge and center this. I'm going to create my color. I'm not interested in any of those. I'm going to create my own bespoke color. It's not even one of these standard colors, so I'm going to make a custom color. Let's say I'm going to make it around a dark teal. I'm going to take the hex number, Control C to copy, and then click OK. So I've copied that hex number. I'll put it underneath just to remind me that's the hex number. If I just type hex here, that will remind me. I can use that similar approach for other colors I want to use. You might have several, you might only have a couple that you need, but edit these colors as I'm going to do here and then skip through. So there we go, I've got a mid teal for my middle color, the hex for that is that hashtag number, and I've got a grayish teal for my other things. So if I have this as titles, so I know what I'm using them for, subtitle, and then other. And to format several things at once, you can select your range, hold down Control and select other ranges, and I'm going to merge and center those, make these bigger and choose bold. And I'm just going to show you, it's quite handy having these bespoke colors because now they're in this recent color pane, but if they weren't there, I can always go to the copy my hex number, Control and C from here, and then go to my more colors, custom, and instead of picking it from this gamut there, now I can just Control V in the hex and click OK. But I don't need to do that for the other ones because they're in my recent colors. So it gives you a good preview of what it looks like as text and as a fill color. So I think that's a reasonable thing, and I can give this title color scheme, and I like to oversize my titles. Also, what you might want to do in Excel while we're here, Control A. I don't like this Aptos narrow. I quite like Arial, so I'll select everything, change it all to Arial, which I think is a bit more readable. So that's my color scheme, color swatches sorted. I'm going to make that sheet grey because it's less important. We're going to leave lookups for a moment. So I've right click on a sheet and choose the tab color. My pivots is of medium importance, and I want people to navigate that, so I'm going to have that the mid color. My dashboard is high importance, so I'm going to have that the dark color. My intro is high importance. So my dashboard and intro are going to be the things that my front end users are going to be navigating. And then my data, less important, so I'm going to use my grayish teal color, as I am for the lookups, because those feed the data. So I've got my sheet tabs there. Let me just go back to the other workbook. So just some notes I've put here. So as I've mentioned, this can be helpful to keep things consistent because congruence is king when it comes to creating a report for your end users, and it's handy so that you've got it in the recent items, particularly if it's not one of those ready-made color schemes. If there is a color that you like from the ready-made scheme, by all means choose it, but try not to be too garish, because the most readable thing is, as I show in my 5 practices for perfect presentations, which I discuss, one of the practices is about accessibility and readability. The most readable is black or dark text on a white background. Then you'll have these are still fairly readable at this medium level text. This is getting a bit less readable, and obviously this light green on a white background is not very readable at all and not very accessible. So we'll try and avoid those ones. Yeah, so that's the color sheets. Now if I go back to my book and the steps, I formatted the sheets, I've created the sheets, so now it's time to clean up and ready your data. So as I allude to here, no dashboard exists without data that it's actually looking at. So you'll do well to spend a lot of time preparing this first, because everything else is pretty much just niceties on the front end that you're sticking on, the pivot tables, the pleasing charts. It's all design. This is the technical bit. So it's a good workflow to focus on the technical bit first, because that uses a bit of a different side of your brain really than the design side. If you're trying to do both at once, you're kind of in fits and starts, and you won't have a good flow. So get all the technical stuff done, then get on to the creative stuff, which that's why I'm separating it out in these videos. I put the raw data in its own sheet. So what I've got is a data sheet. In the other one, here's one I created earlier, Blue Peter dashboard. Here's my raw data, where I've manually gone and entered all the employees that I recall or am aware of from both the USA and the UK series of The Office, the employees of the fictional paper company Dunder Mifflin. And I've given a whole heap of categories there. So you might do data entry. You might indeed copy and paste from an export from your personnel system. In this case, this is all HR data. So the bit that's actual data from a system and not stuff I've manipulated or calculated is these fields from A to R. The yellow things are additional categories I've added because they don't need to be manually entered, because I can calculate them. So when you can use calculations and categorizations, that removes the risk of errors for the people entering it, but also makes extra fields that saves people from spending the time entering it, and fields that you can use and analyze later on. So turning a date of birth, for example, here, column F, into both an age, here, column AC, and an age group, grouping those ages to make it more easily analyzable. But first of all, I'm just going to get my data set. I'm not going to type it all out again, you'll be pleased to know. So here's my data set. I'm going to put it in this book 1. Under data, I'm going to paste special values only. So this is what Excel will generally look like when you enter data. It'll all be in a boring, bland format. But I find things easier to work with. Doing the technical stuff is easier if your data's formatted a lot nicer. So with this, I like to first of all select the area, and I'll format with a fill of light grey, and I'm going to put my all borders around it so I can see the separation. my top row, I'm going to select the row, press bold, and actually I'm going to make that slightly bigger. I'm going to do my Control A again to create everything into Arial, which I prefer. And I'm going to make sure the data is formatted in the way I want. So date of birth at the moment, you see it's formatted as a numerical value. So I'm going to select that column. I'm going to choose a number, not a number, sorry, a short date format for that. Also for the start date, I'm going to have short date format, so it actually looks like a date. The annual salary and last year bonus, these ones I want not general. You can have currency. I quite like the currency one because it aligns everything nicely, even though accounting's supposedly for accountants. But what I want to do, I don't need the pence. The nearest pound is good enough for me. So I'm going to decrease the decimal by just pressing this twice to move that decimal over so it doesn't take up as much space. So there we go. That's the main data set that I might have downloaded from a HR system, for example, or you can just manually enter it. Going back to the other sheet, I've got all this data, but I've also got these formula bars, these calculations here. These are quite helpful. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to go in detail from scratch creating all the formulas. I'm going to take the first row and show you how you can make use of formulas once you've done one of them. So I'm going to just paste this here, ready-made. Why that's made my first row wider is because these are formatted as wrap text, so it wraps the text within the cell rather than just does it in a horrible unwrapped text format. So let's wrap the text of these as well. So select those and wrap text. I'm going to have them in the center, both in the middle of the cell, up and down middle, and in the center, left and right center. So my titles look in order. So I've done some extra fields that might be useful metrics for HR. So for example, a personal sickness rate, Bradford factor rating, and so on. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on these other than to show you the different sorts of formulas you can do. So personal sickness rate, I'll zoom in on that. So that's looking at the 12 months sick days, dividing that by 250 divided by 40, so roughly about 250 working week days in a year divided by 40 hours a week in brackets. So get the result of that, putting it all in brackets, and then times 02, so proportionate to that person's weekly hours pro rata. So if the person's part-time, their personal sickness rate will accommodate accordingly. Because otherwise organisations tend to report an aggregate sickness rate, but I think a personal sickness rate is a good alternative to the Bradford factor, which is very skewed. The Bradford factor is basically, again, in brackets first, do this part of the calculation first, the occurrences times the days, and then times that by occurrences again. So it kind of double exaggerates the occurrences. So if you've got not many days, but loads of times you've taken sickness, it tries to weed out the so-called genuine sickness from the might not be so genuine sickness. But it is quite crude. And then what I've done, I've created a category formula. So in this one, this is using an if statement. So whereby I've, based on the value of these sickness occurrences, and I've chosen anything less than 1. So if any if statement, so if statement's what you use to create categories, open brackets, if my Bradford factor, so that's the T2, is less than 1, and in this case it's 0, put the text, so put my text in quotations and put it as nil. Otherwise, so the comma otherwise here, and then do another if statement. So I'm not creating two categories, I want to create multiple categories. So I'm going to create if statements at the end of my otherwise comma, create all my categories. So if it's less than 50 Bradford factor, then I'll call that low. If it's less than 125, I'll call that medium. And if it's greater than 124, which basically in Excel includes 125 and higher, I'll call that high. And otherwise, if none of that works, my final logical test value, if false, I'm just going to put error, because that will show me if I've messed up the formula somewhere. And then you bung a load of brackets at the end until you've got a bracket that goes black, and that basically marries up the end number of brackets you need to weigh up against all the starting opening brackets. So I've got 4 opening brackets, so I need, by the end of all my if categories, 4 closing brackets. And the number of brackets will correspond to the categories you've got. Next, I've got a VLOOKUP function where I'm using a lookup table to denote from my I2. So based on my variety of job roles, I want to kind of aggregate those into a seniority. Similarly, I want to do a VLOOKUP. I'll do a separate video on VLOOKUPs, but it's basically you do VLOOKUP, you get your value that you want to look up, comma, you find the array that it's in. So if it's in the same sheet, this would actually be referring to lookups as a sheet, and you wouldn't have any of this in here, so that's just complicating it. So it's in my lookup sheet, that's a named sheet, that's why it's in single quotations and an exclamation mark. My range within that sheet, so I'm looking for this value in this sheet array, and then bring me back the second column from that. So if I show you my lookup sheet that I created in the one I did earlier, so I'm looking up in lookups this table array. Here's my row, look up the row and then give me the second column next to that row when you find it, and that's why it brings it back and places it here. Total salary, that's just the salary plus a bonus. You might find bonus as a percent of salary. Percentage is always handy to calculate, and again, as I've explained before, calculate a percentage of something else, then basically your smaller number is divided by the big number, and then format it as a percentage in the format, which you've got a quick button to do here. So in this case, it's my bonus divided by the total salary. So that means 13% of Michael Scott's salary for last year was a bonus, or total remuneration, I should say, was formed of bonus. Service length is 25 years, so this is quite a good one. So based on the start date, DATEDIF is the function you'll use, where you calculate, so again, as any function equals DATEDIF, and then open brackets. So L2 is my start date. Today is the comparator date, and then you put Y in the end of it and close the brackets. If you want help on formulas, you can always use the function arguments thing, which takes you through like a wizard. Some of them. The DATEDIF one, though, is a kind of legacy formula in Excel, so that's just a handy one that I just already know that isn't in the new Excel to take you through, I don't think. Again, I've done a similar if statement to create if formula to create myself a bunch of categorized data. In this instance, I've got, how many brackets are there? 5 brackets, so I've created 5 categories. So I'm basically breaking down that service length that I've just found, because I don't want to do it all in one formula, a DATEDIF combined with an if statement. That'd just be too complex. So I'm going to break it down into manageable chunks. I'm going to calculate the service length first, then categorize that service length in an if formula into simple categories. So whether that's 1 year, less than 1 year, new starter, 1 to 3 years category. And I put it all in double quotation marks because then Excel knows that you just want text there, not some sort of values or anything fancy. 4 to 10 years, 11 to 19 years, and then 20 years plus. So it's saying if that's similar to the Bradford factor one, if it's this, then put that category in there. The month, this is quite a handy formula to know. So this is equals text, because I want to just extract from a date of birth the month. So this one's equals text, my date of birth field, which is in F2 for this person, Michael Scott. So have a look at F2 for me, and then comma, bring back the which is Excel's way of saying type out the full month, please, because otherwise if I just put Excel thinks, oh, you just want the 3-letter month, but you add the extra M on, you get the full month. And that even that even works for May, even though there's only 3 letters, but you get the idea, it just does the full month. Age, if you just want to copy this formula, so if you want to calculate someone's age in your employee database, again, you don't need to get people to type it out or enter a longer and longer form with all these fields. You can calculate it from the date of birth again. So F2 was Michael Scott's date of birth, and my formula is starting with a round down, but ultimately I'm getting it's the year fraction off F2 compared to today. My basis is 1, and then all that year fraction formula, which is this section within those brackets, is encased in a round down, because if I didn't have that round down, it would, if I get rid of that outer casing, it would give me a very precise age, and I don't want to report on someone that's 50. Oh, hello, I'm 50 and 1/10 years old. No, we're just going to keep it, undo that, encase it in round down. Yeah, Michael Scott, he's 50. So based on that age, I then can categorize into age groups. So I've gone, so if it's less than 25, I'm going to choose 18 to 24. If it's less than 35, I'm going to put it in the next 10-year bracket. 45, 10-year bracket in double quotes, 55, so on and so forth. And again, the error is just a good thing to place at the end, because then you're telling Excel to flag back to you if you've made an error in your formula. Now, full-time equivalent, to calculate that in your HR dataset is a simple thing, O2. So what I'm doing is calculating the weekly hours for that person, so what they're contracted to do, divided by my assumption of what is a full-time rate. So for my company, a full-time rate might be 40 hours, it might be 38 hours, 37, depending on what your assumption is for what full-time is. Just do your hours divided by your assumed full-time rate. Based on that full-time equivalent hours, I'm going to choose full or part-time as a simple 2-part category. So if it's less than 40, then I'm going to say it's PT for part-time. But if my weekly hours is equals 40, because I'm never going to have anyone that's over, then I'm going to choose full-time. Otherwise, I'm going to choose error. And then finally, a really helpful thing in Excel is you used to have to use a concatenate formula to abridge text. What I'm going to just do, no, I'll do that after. So I've got the full name of this person based on their first name and their last name. And it's really simple to do now to get that concatenate any text together. If you want to combine a first line of address with a postcode, for example, that's quite a handy use of this formula. or anything really. You want to you've got a bespoke, you want to combine the employee ID with the name, up to you. But ultimately what you do is instead of equals concatenate open brackets and yada yada, you just put equals B2, so the first name, and then it's the ampersand. So now I just say and then my quotation marks. Between those quotation marks is what Excel wants to know what you want in there. So the quotation marks won't be included, but the space bar between those quotation marks, because I want a space between my first name and last name. So first name and space and last name. So equals first name and space and last name. If I just press escape because I keep clicking in other cells, and that will produce that concatenated name. So happy days. It's a small company, Dunder Mifflin, even though they talk about corporate. There's only 50 or 49 when I minus the first row employees. But now I've got all my data categories. What I'm going to do, rather than type out all those formulas again, is I'm going to select all these, and you can either drag them using this little bar in the bottom right, little square, sorry, can you see it? I'll zoom in. You can either drag it, or even quicker than that, just double click it and it will fill out your data to where it recognizes is the last record. So it will find the last record on the left, and thankfully it will stop there. You might notice these hashtags. That just means the cell's not wide enough to capture the massive salary there of Jan Leveson in corporate. So wherever you see that, if it relates to a number, it comes out as hashtags, or old money terms before Twitter and hashtagging things, the icon for a number. So that's what that means. It's just saying, it's giving you the icon for a number because it can't display the numbers. And you might want to tidy these up a little bit, so you might want to give a bit of extra width to your categories, or as I've just done there, you can select your columns and just double click any one of them, and then that will auto make them auto wide as long as wide as they need to be. So I might do that as well for my raw data columns. So there we go. I'm going to make these ones a bit wider because I don't want 4 lines of text. So I'm going to double click that one to make that as narrow as it needs to be. So here I've got my data sorted. What I also want to do is, where is it, sort and filter. So I want to filter, because sometimes people might want to go, oh hang on, let me just find, I need to find Dwight Schrute's record, so let me just find Schrute from this selection, where I need to filter on all the males, or so on and so forth. So this is the kind of noob way of analyzing data, but obviously you're going to create a dashboard that does it with pivot tables and charts, so people, and slicers, so people haven't got to do this kind of old-fashioned way and slow way of counting things. But it's there if people want to use it. So that is ready if you want at this stage for pivot tables. However, I would strongly recommend using formatting this as a table, as a proper table, because then when you insert a pivot table, the pivot table will always extend to reference the whole of that table. Because otherwise, what I've done in the past, you add, maybe you get some new employees, you need to add them below, and you've set a pivot table so it's only looking up to row 50. Then obviously you need to manually go and change the source of your pivot table to broaden it to include these new employees, for example. One way I've previously done a workaround before to get around that is, well, okay, I'm not going to select my pivot table area as a data range. I'm going to select the whole blooming columns so that whatever I enter underneath will always get captured. However, the problem with that then is your pivot table will start to show this field called blanks, and that is really annoying, because then you have to switch off blanks manually, and then when you update it again, the new data doesn't come in automatically. You have to reselect those items. So just do a table, bite the bullet, and the way to do that is go to Insert. I'm going to insert a table, choose Table. It's automatically recognized my table area by those green marching ants. My table does have headers, so we need to check that on, and then click OK. Annoyingly though, that's reformatted some of my table, so I'm just going to fix that. Okay, so what the reformat table has done, it's automatically selected some random design, and only parts of the design has overridden my manual formatting I sorted earlier. So you go up to Table Design, choose this drop down and go back to Light, so that will not override my formatting, because I forgot to set a specific format in the top bar. And what I'm going to do as well is what formatting something as a table does. You might notice it makes all your columns wider, but you might not like that, as I don't, because I don't like having columns that are too wide for the category. I'd rather just have a wider title row. So I'm going to move those all across. So I'm going to quickly do that for a bunch of my categories and then skip. So there we go. I've redone all my width, so it's the width more of the data rather than the title. So the last thing I need to do now is just double click the height of the first row, and that will automatically create it into what it needs. So there's my data formatted as a table, and make sure you call that table name something more meaningful than table 1. Obviously, if it's the only table in your workbook, your Excel workbook, then table 1's fine, but I'm going to call this people data. Okay then, one thing you might want to do is sort the page breaks of your data, because some clever bright spark, particularly possibly an older fashioned senior manager, might just want a simple printout of all the employees of your organization, which if you were to try and print this out, it's going to look too small for their beady little eyes. So what you want to do on this is sort out your page margins. So at the top here, I've got a print preview and print button, which you can sort out your buttons. The main ones are here, but you can customize your quick access toolbar should you wish. I'll show you that in a different video. But under my print, you'll notice that the default, it's got all this thing which is basically unreadable. So under page layout, this is where you can sort out your printing area. So first of all, I'm going to select my area that I want to print. So let's say I'm only interested in the information up to the PDR rating. So what I'm going to do is then select my print area and set that print area. So now if I quickly print preview, it's not printing anything outside that grey area, but it's all a complete mess. So I need to tidy that mess. So first of all, I want the orientation to be landscape, because when I go to my print now, that's starting to look a little bit better, because my data is very, very wide, but not very long. So I want it to format as that. I want it to be readable, so I want to print across 2 pages wide. So what I'm going to need, and the subsequent pages, I want to keep my titles there. So I want to keep my titles at the top, and I want to keep my names and employee ID at the side. So the way to do that is go to print titles, and you repeat the rows at the top. So the rows I want to repeat at the top is that one on every page, and the columns I want to repeat on the left is my employee ID and first and last name. So then if I click and For data, you probably want to go over, then down. So you see it's going across for the same people before it then gets to the next people. So for people data like this, and a data kind of table, let's print preview it now. So this is my page 1. Notice with page, so it goes up to job role for Michael Scott, but then it continues to include the salary and bonuses and other information for that person. And then it goes down to the next set of people in my 49 employees, 30 through 49, and gives their first set of details and second set of details. You can make the margins wider and maximize that print layout, but that's how to create a good print preview of your pages, of your data. So now that prints out nicely on 4 pages in a logical way for a manager. Annoyingly for me, it's set these marching ants where the page break previews are. If I just show you, that's the page break preview, so you can kind of get an idea of where the page breaks are, and that's a quick shortcut should you wish to kind of expand your print area and include an extra couple of categories. And I'm just going to stop it when it starts going to extra pages. So where my page breaks are, I get these marching ants that you might see here that's encroached on my nicely formatted lines. They're really hidden in Excel. So what I do to hide those marching ants, it's hidden in a deep down location under File, Options, Advanced. You'll never find it, you'll never guess where it was if you didn't know. Get to the display section, get to the display options for this worksheet, and check off this show page breaks, and then click OK, and then those marching ants will disappear. So that's all your data in order. I'm going to save this ready for the pivot table in the next video. So I'll create the pivot tables. I'm just going to quickly run to my other workbook where I've given some notes for myself and for you, some tips along the way, just to make sure I've covered all the things to get your data in order. So your data source, just some things I wanted to say about that. So wherever you source your data, Excel could be your database itself. So you can type in new rows, and when you've got a new employee, because your data's formatted as a table, if I start to type in, we've just employed some other poor sucker to come to Dunder Mifflin, and oh no, it's me. I'm in the UK, and so on. You fill it out, and you notice that the table has already expanded to engulf that record, if you like, and that means your pivot tables that are referencing this data will add it. And I mean, practically, Excel can handle things that are, try and keep it under 100,000 records, won't you? Tens of thousands is perfectly fine. If you're getting beyond that, then you might need to consider using something like a Power Query. Maybe I'll do a video on that in future. When you're copying new data, as I did at the start, copy it as paste values if you're copying a new data set. So if your employee database spits out your latest employees and it's completely changed from last time, just paste values over or next append in the next available row of your original data set, and it'll add it there as a table, as part of the table. Just bear in mind with personnel data, it is personal information, so think of GDPR or how you categorize things, especially when you're in the public sector. Be careful, particularly with dashboards, although you might end up hiding certain sheets in the background, they're still accessible. So some public sector organizations have tripped up on that when they've responded to FOI requests, and they've hidden a sheet, but that doesn't actually delete it. So before you work with your dashboard, if you want the functionality of a dashboard, but you don't want everyone that's using that dashboard the ability to see the data in the background, delete any columns that refer to personal names and information. So I've gone through the colours and lines. I've set the column widths. You can add conditional formatting if you want. I've done the filters, so conditional formatting, you might go, well, let's format anyone that's these numbers based on the full-time nature. So I can choose data bars. Yeah, that's quite a good conditional format. And let's keep it yellow in line with my rest of my table. So this starts to make your data a bit more dynamic if someone delves in at the data, record level data. And what this is called structured data, by the way, where you've got columns for each field that says something about a record, and each row is a record in itself that says something about, in this case, a person. But if it's your sales database, it will say something about a sale. And as I mentioned, just format it as a table, because as I explained before, it messes up your pivot tables one way or another if you don't. It's so much easier, just format it as a table, do it. So I've shown you how you can do categories and why that's important and helpful to save people entering loads of data. For employees, always have a unique reference number, because those can, or a sale or anything, have a unique reference number, and make sure that reference number is your first column, because then when you do any kind of VLOOKUPs or things like that, things, when you're trying to match things up, it always needs to be in that first column to the thing you're matching to. Clearly formatting the headings is helpful. I've wrapped the text because I don't like my columns too wide. Don't wrap the text in the main data set though, because I think it's helpful working with data, because this is quite a technical process, working with raw data, and it can be quite headache inducing. It's far more helpful if you're not if you're keeping it quite uniform, so you can eyeball it and notice anything that sticks out. That's a lot harder to do if you've wrapped the text so that different rows are different sizes, and it just starts to look a bit messy. And Power Query, yeah, consider that if you're going to be handling far more than what I would advise as usual in Excel. So yeah, tens of thousands of rows, several tens of thousands up to is okay, but if you're going beyond that, then maybe use Power Query if you're going to do pivot tables, because every pivot table you do basically increases the file size. But I'll show you in the next video about pivot tables, so that's a good segue to close this one. So ultimately we are going to get to a dashboard. This has been video 2 where I showed you the data. Video 1 was where, in this mini series, was where I demonstrated the dashboard itself, and in the next video I will show you in the steps creating the pivot tables based on all that data. But if you followed along, well done. You've got your data in order. That's a really important step, and it is quite time consuming, and it's taken a bit of time today, partly because I've been rambling a bit, so hopefully not too much for your patience. But yeah, I hope you found that video useful. You can find me on excel@theoffice.com, where I'll place all these files and such for you to use in a blog to go through. But until next time, take care.